You are listening to a Difference for One podcast, episode number 33.
I'm Michelle.
I'm Nicole.
I'm Cherise.
And I'm Cami.
We are the English sisters.
We come together to share life-changing methods of improvement through a variety of topics.
We hope that above all, these discussions will help you feel that Jesus Christ is making a difference for you, the one. And we also hope that our podcast will inspire you to find simple ways that you can make a difference for one.
Hello, everyone. This is Cherise here, and I have a special guest with me today. She is my friend, Emily Bernath, and I met her through the Calliope Writing Coach program, and we are both coaches in that program, and we are having a lot of fun. Emily, will you tell us a little bit about yourself really quick?
Yes. So I had the idea to first start writing because I wanted to lead a small group for my church, actually. And so the books I write are devotionals. You know, when people's like, what's a devotional? I say kind of like faith-based self-help, you know, and for me, really the heart behind my writing is in John 8:32, when Jesus says that when we know the truth will set us free. So a lot of my writing explores what is the truth and, you know, as a result, what is the freedom I gain from knowing that? So in Broken Lenses, Identifying Your Truth in a World of Lies, my first book, which was released last year, that kind of more identifies self-truths, like who am I? I am creative. I am lovable. I am smart. And now my second book, Broken Lenses Volume 2, Seeing Others' Value in a World of Division, is currently under publication, and the ebook is releasing March 2nd, and the paperback will be releasing in bookstores across the country on June 8th, 2021.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. So in addition to that, I do some advocacy work. I'm on the board of a nonprofit of Reveal to Heal International, which works with survivors of sexual assault, because I am one myself. And that is where my rediscovering of my faith began, was from that experience and really trying to figure out, okay, what the heck, God? And, you know, it was a process, but God has really shown me that I am worthy and I am loved, and it's totally freed me from this hurt that I had in my life. And I want everybody who has had similar experiences to know the same love and freedom that I have. That's a little bit about me.
We'll be back after this quick break with a message from our sponsors.
That is so awesome. And I completely commend you for always putting yourself in a vulnerable position in front of other people, putting your story out there, literally in a book where people can hold it in their hands and see right through you, through your words. And I just really appreciate that. And I honor you for that. I love your backstory because that is exactly what we are going to talk about today in a way. I wanted to talk to the audience about healing from past trauma. And it's kind of a heavy subject. And I felt like I wasn't adequate enough to portray this just through my own stories, but I felt like I needed somebody else's stories as well to kind of come in at another angle so that we can be more relatable to the audience members and hopefully get this idea put across. First of all, I like to just get the basic understanding across. To heal means to alleviate a person's distress or anguish. It could also mean to become sound or healthy again, or to correct or to put right. And I really love those definitions because a lot of times when we have experiences in our lives, it's not that those experiences ever go away, but it's that the pressure from some of those experiences are alleviated. And that's when we feel that true healing. Today, I want to talk about healing from past trauma. And trauma means something that could be a physical injury, or it could be something that's really deeply distressing or disturbing experience, like emotional shock following a stressful event. Really quick, let's go back to what we in this podcast have talked about in episode 2, where we talk about the thought cycle. You have your thoughts, your emotions, your effort, and your outcome. And we've talked about different ways and ideas of how to go through your thought cycle and use it as a tool to process certain experiences in your life, or just a way to self-improve. But I've noticed that when people are in survival mode, is what I call it, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. I've noticed that when people are in survival mode. They struggle to step away from that traumatic experience that they had and move on from it. I think a lot of people naturally, I think I've done this in the past, where something crazy will happen, or my perception is that something crazy happened and I can't seem to let it go. So I decide to ignore it and hope that it just disappears magically, but it never disappears. Have you ever experienced anything like that before, Emily?
Yeah. So I guess for me, I'll just give background. I would say I first prayed to be a believer, receive God in my life when I was in middle school, but I never made that a lifestyle. And so it never really carried much importance in my life. And so when I was sexually assaulted in college, I didn't have a foundation in Christ to lean on because I didn't know that was a thing that people could have. And so really on that night, I turned to God in anger because I knew he was real and I needed him to know, like, what the heck, God, why did this just happen to me? And as far as healing goes, like, I didn't know God as a God who was a healer. And all I knew is that something had happened to me that I did not ask for. And immediately my perception of myself went from thinking I was an all right person to worthlessness and disgust and uselessness. And I wanted out of my body. Like someone had tainted my body and I wanted out, but I couldn't. You can't escape that. And so you're just stuck with this continued anguish. You're like reliving that trauma, right? Because you're stuck in this very thing that you want out of. For me, you're talking about healing as alleviating a person's distress or anguish. I did exactly what you were saying. And for me, that alleviation came from drinking because, I had pursued that lifestyle in college and it wasn't healthy, but that's what I did. And that's the only answer I had. And so that's my survival mode. I needed to get that moment out of my head. And if I drank enough to forget about it, then, at least that was better than having to be consciously aware of this disgust that I had for myself.
So in a past episode, we talked about drinking or other things as coping mechanisms. We called them hedging because we talked about our thought cycle being a field of perception and it being like a garden or field, right? And a hedge or a bush is a way to kind of block out in your mind so that you can't see other things that are bothering you. You just put that hedge up and those weeds on the other side, they're not going to bug you. And that drinking was your way of hedging. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Absolutely. And I think there really is a deeper issue to that. Like, yes, there's an issue that you're drinking and doing unhealthy things to cover up this, you're not addressing the real issue when you do that, right? So that's unhealthy. But there's an issue too that I didn't think I was capable of that kind of healing. Like this was my new reality and that was just my life. Like I didn't know if I could ever get back to this state where I saw myself as someone who was worthy of a good relationship, worthy of people to see me as someone who they would even want to get to know, right? Like I just lost a lot of friends in a really short amount of time in that period of my life. And that was just another type of trauma, really. Probably more of a little t trauma is what people has referred to the big T that sexual assault would be, but it was definitely trauma. And a lot of it stemmed from going to people and trying to I know some survivors out there are very quiet about what happened to them and they have very good reasons to do so. So I'm not condemning that, but I personally was not quiet about it. I shared what had happened to me. I guess I expected people to sympathize with me more, and I really didn't receive that. I got asked a lot of questions like, why didn't you say this? Or why didn't you do that? Or, and I'm not kidding. I got straight up told it was my fault by someone. And I just didn't see a ton of value in myself, but I knew that I didn't deserve to receive that kind of treatment. I had to separate myself from a lot of social circles and interactions that I was involved with at that time. And it was isolating. And, and you're already isolating yourself enough by telling yourself that you don't deserve good relationships or anything that you had previously. And that's just kind of another layer of isolation on top of that.
Do you feel like those people that were constantly asking you questions and trying to analyze the situation that happened to you, do you feel like you were reliving the situation as you kept having to talk about it and explain yourself?
Absolutely. And to a certain layer, it communicated to me that I wasn't believed. And I get it. You're trying to understand, but at the end of the day, they don't want to answer that question. They want you to be like, hey, I'm here for you. Validation and constantly having to go back to trying to justify why this was wrong, that is not validating at all.
I love all of that. And I haven't had the same experiences as you, but I totally understand what you're talking about. When my husband was going through cancer the first time, a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, is there anything I can do for you? And they were doing the typical things, also trying to understand how or why that happened. Some people came up to me and said, well, if you do this diet for him, then it'll go away. And I'm sure that works for some people, but there's not like one cure for all kinds of cancers. But the second time that he had cancer, a lot of times I felt isolated. I felt like I had done something wrong, or how can this come up again? I felt like, well, now that I have kids, there's no way that I'm able to take care of him like I did the first time. And just all of those thoughts constantly running through my mind, constantly attacking myself, that when it came time to me finally being willing to open up and be vulnerable with people, I was hoping and expecting for some validation. And a lot of times I didn't get that. And so I totally understand what you're saying about that, because sometimes it takes all of the courage just to open up and be honest. And you're just wanting to hear, I get that. I'm so sorry. And you don't always get that response. And most of the time, I think it's because people are trying to go through their own thought cycle, their own thought processes, because people want to understand the why. And this is new information, and they're processing out loud, which sometimes is a dangerous situation because not everybody has a good filter when they're processing out loud. But yeah, like we're all imperfect and we're all trying to figure this out. And I personally love to be aware of what my thoughts are and how I am thinking and what I am feeling, so that I can learn to be better the next time, because I'm hoping that my husband doesn't have cancer again. But if he does, or if there's another sickness in my family, I will be able to mentally have gone through that type of hurdle and be able to have some tools to get me through the next hurdle. You were talking about how you were in survival mode and you used drinking as a coping mechanism, or as hedging, I've called it. What did you do to get out of that?
Well, it really wasn't anything I did personally originally. It was someone else. In that season of my life, after going through sexual assault, it didn't give me this hardened heart toward men per se, but it really was a time in my life that I wanted a woman I could confide in, and I did not have that. And I didn't have it because I didn't value that kind of friendship on that level previously. I never had a need in my life to necessarily, and maybe that's even a privilege, right? I hadn't come to a point in my life where that was something I thought was important. And here I was, that's all I wanted, right? Is this like a community of women I could go to and just like open up to because I was so hurt. And so it was really someone approaching me and inviting me to go with them to this small group that they led, which was a Bible study. It was actually a group I had heard of in the past, but just never gone because I didn't see the need to. But really at this point in my life, I was like, oh my gosh, someone is inviting me to go somewhere with them. Like she had known what I had gone through. Like I said, I wasn't super quiet about it, but it didn't influence the way that she saw me. And that was powerful. And so I said yes. And through that gained a new community of people living their lives for Christ and showing me how I could do the same. It was really powerful.
So having that community and having that friendship and a group of women to turn to, did that feel really validating to open up to them? Was that the validation that you initially were seeking?
Absolutely, yeah. I would say definitely that was a good foot in the door. But for me, even though I did have these friends and I knew that they saw me differently, it didn't cause me to see myself differently originally. It was just nice to know that like other people could see something in me. If that makes sense. And I knew that they had found that in having a relationship with God. And quite frankly, I didn't know having a relationship with God was possible. And like that just wasn't a concept that was taught to me growing up. And so if this was something that I could really have and change the way that I saw myself, I wanted that. And so I didn't know what that looked like, but I pursued it. And it really came through a message one night at a church. And basically they were talking about the value that our bodies have to God. And it was in 1 Corinthians. That was like describing our body as a temple. And I was like, I don't see my body as a temple. I see my body as a worthless piece of crap. Basically, I don't even want to be housed within my own body, let alone God. Like, you what? That just, it blew my mind. And so really it goes back to, you know, what I was saying is like in John 8:32, when he says, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. And I'm like, all right, God, if this is true, if this is really how you see me and how you value me, I want that. I want to be set free from these thoughts that I have about myself. And so that's really where it came from, getting to know who God is on a deeper level and how he sees me. And by association, the more we getting to know him, the more we get to know ourselves because he made us.
Yeah, I love that. And that is such an interesting perspective because for me, I grew up being told that my body is a temple. I remember my dad telling me when I was really young that I wasn't allowed to get my ears pierced because my body was a temple and you don't just go up to the temple and pierce the temple. Still to this day, I don't have my ears pierced just because I valued that advice from my father at a very, very young age. I mean, even today, like it's not a big deal whether you have your ears pierced or not. I just remember thinking, I just don't want to do anything to defile my body on the outside because I want to be as clean and pure and worthy as I possibly can. But then we have these trials in our lives and we do our best to be as good as we know how to be. And yet all of this stuff still happens. We are still susceptible to trials in our life. So you sought validation and then you got the support from a group and then you researched and you studied and you learned about God and you created by learning about him a relationship with him. Yes. So what was the action that you took to finally give yourself permission to trust in him and let go of your past traumatic experiences?
I would say for me, what that experience did, it planted a seed within me to want to be a light to other women, other survivors. And really because I knew how life-changing that was for me to be able to see myself as, someone who is valued and worthy. I wanted other people to be able to see that in themselves as well. And really that's a lot of the heart behind my second book, the subtitle, Seeing Others' Value in a World of Division, right? Like the whole premise being that when we value others the way that God does, it unites us. And when we see others the way the world tells us to, it divides us. And I had a lot of dividing thoughts ruling my mind after that traumatic event had happened. And that's all I could think about. Knowing the power that both of those two things can have in our mind when we let them control our thoughts, the unity and the division coming from seeing how we value ourselves either the way God does or the world. I made that my commitment that I wanted to be that light to other women. And that's really where my motivation for wanting to lead a small group began. And that's why I started writing to begin with. I wanted to lead a group. And someone approached me. They're like, all right, Emily, lead this group. What does it look like? And I realized that day, I was like, I got to write it. I know what I want to say. I got to write it. And that scared the crap out of me because I have a chemistry degree and I have a business degree and I don't write books. But I was like, all right, God, whatever. That's part of the action, right? Surrendering it and writing this book. What does it look like? I don't know. But if this is what I got to do to be a light to other survivors, then this is what I'm going to do.
So that action you took was serving other women and being there for them and also providing a resource for them to turn to because you're not always 100% available for them to talk to. Like they need to be able to learn these things for themselves. Because I read your first book. I haven't read your second book yet, but I noticed that it's a workbook, almost like a journal where they can write down their own thoughts and their own impressions as they are learning from you in your book. And I really, really love that you provided this service. Has writing been therapeutic for you to heal from your past traumatic experiences?
Yes, it has. And I didn't expect it to be as much as it really was. Because like I said, I was vocal about what happened to me. I had told that story. I'd told it many times, but I had told it verbally. And I was like, well, how much different could writing be, right? Joke's on me. Apparently it's a lot different. And I had a moment about 7 months, 8 months, I don't know, into my writing process of the first book that, oh man, I need to write my story in here. And I was not ready for that. So, I start integrating my story in the book. And then once I get to the part about being raped, I'm like, I couldn't even think. I wasn't even sitting down to write. I couldn't think about sitting down to write without bawling. And I was like, why am I such a mess? I've told the story. I know what happened. Just write it. To me, it really came down to I had control over what parts were shared in my story when I share it verbally. If I'm with a certain group of people I'm not as comfortable around, maybe I won't share as much versus, if they're my best friends, I'll share more. I'm not going to lie, but it's just the extent to which you're sharing, right? And you don't have control over that when you're writing. It's like, are you going to share it or are you not? You got to make the choice. That was tough. And I was like, you really have to surrender that the story is out there, people are going to know it. And you just pray that God can use it to help bring healing to other people because they can relate for sure. So yes, definitely writing was healing in a way that I did not expect.
And it was scary through that. Like it wasn't a hurdle that you just moved to the side and then walked through like with track, but it was actually a hurdle that you jumped over and it was really, really hard to get through.
Yes.
So for me, I'm writing a book as well, and I haven't had mine published yet. I'm literally walking through Emily's footsteps and learning from her on how to get this book published. And I'm really grateful that she is a guinea pig for me. But I have noticed that writing my book was really therapeutic for me. It was more therapeutic than I was expecting. So in my story, I wrote about how I had depression as a result from my husband having cancer. And I didn't even realize that I had depression until a suicidal thought came into my mind. And that absolutely terrified me because I knew that that was not a normal thing because I've talked about thought processes before in my life. And I've met with people who have had suicidal thoughts and they didn't know that that was not okay. So I'm just telling you guys, if that has crossed your mind, please talk to a professional. Please go to somebody who can help you because suicidal thoughts are real and very serious and not from God. And even if you don't know me, you are loved. And that is real and that is truth. When it came to the chapter when I wrote about the depression that happened to me, because I don't think that depression came from me. I think it came from an outside source of thoughts that were being put into my mind from some unknown world, unknown entity or entities. I don't know, but it felt impossible to write that section. And so I wrote it in third person because it was a little bit easier to talk about somebody else having that experience and kind of seeing it from above and like, okay, this happened to Cherise and this happened to Cherise and then she did this and then she did that. And then I went through that chapter and changed everything that was in third person back into first person. And I read through it and I got to cry more and process more. And it finally felt like the story was out there and was real, but it wasn't real until I could tell the truth of it all. It didn't feel like I was being authentic enough. And I was really grateful for that way of doing the process of how I wrote that section of my book, even though it's very different than how people write. Some people write with their pen and paper and some people write with a computer and some people write with sticky notes. It's all different and it's all beautiful and it's all the right way. And I'm really grateful that that was my process because I felt like the true me was out there and it's not published yet. I'm hoping to publish it someday, even though the thought of publishing terrifies me because it's out there for more than just my friends and family to read. One thing I wanted to mention really quick, as I was going through my depression and my process of what I had as trauma, I received validation from two very close friends. One night we had what we like to call a girls' night, and we just talked, and it ended up being all for me that night. Most of the conversation was all about me and getting me out of the depression that I was in. And they were really wonderful friends that have experienced depression before, and they have learned how to discern between the truth and the lies of what mental illnesses do to your brain. They were explaining to me that night of the truths of the Savior's love for me and how he did everything when he came to this earth for us. He went through the atonement process so that we could be healed. He did that for us. And we have the choice to hold on to our trauma, to be stuck, to stay in survival mode and be the victim. We have a choice. And we also have the choice to pick it up and hand it to him and let him heal us in the way that he knows is best, because he is all perfect and all knowing and all truth. And I don't have to know all that he knows to trust in him. I just have to surrender. Like you said earlier, I just have to surrender and give it to him and have faith that the next day I will be happier. And when I was talking to my friends that night, I felt, when I laid my head on the pillow that night, I felt a complete 180 difference. I no longer felt like I was trying to survive inside of my body, that I felt like somebody else was trying to take over. I felt like I no longer had to force smiles on my face and pretend like playing and taking care of my children was not a chore. And I'm really grateful that I had that experience, that I went down to that really deep, dark level so that I can acknowledge that in other people and hopefully teach them how to find the light, because really the only true light is Christ. He really is the light. And until you come to know him and have a relationship with him, you will not be able to move forward.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying. Another one of my favorite verses is John 14:6, where he says that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And just tying that back into the John 8:32, that when we know the truth will set us free. Then Jesus says, I am the truth. Okay, so then if A equals B, B equals C, right? So if Jesus is the truth and the truth that sets us free, then Jesus is freedom, right? Zeroth law of thermodynamics, I believe. I don't know. Pulling out my inner chemistry major there. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Yeah. okay. So yeah, that's telling me that, because I will just validate that the experience doesn't go away. Like it's very much something that, yeah, it still happened. And so you kind of got to go back into, like, if you're not conscious of continually pursuing the truth, you can just as easily now as when it happened, get sucked back into that, going back into the survival mode and back into the hedging and the coping and the whatever else, right? And so for me, as far as like moving forward and this sustained living in this empowered and healed and freed lifestyle is definitely continuing to get to know who God is and explore, get to know this truth on a deeper level. God is so big and so powerful, and we can never know fully who God is because he is just so much bigger than we are. But there is so much that we can continue to learn and know and grow.
And to me, what this is all getting to is once we get out of ourselves and away from ourselves and grasping the truth, we then can go outward and serve others and be there for others. And the only way that I have been able to get to know my Savior better is by trying to be like him and serving others the way that he would want me to serve them, whether that's my children or my husband or my neighbor or my friend or my family or a stranger through this podcast. I don't know, but if I'm constantly making the effort to get out of my own head and do things for others, I feel like I personally can sleep better. And I wasn't always like this. When I met my husband about 12 years ago, I was probably the laziest person he had ever met in his life. And I wanted to have fun and I wanted to do all this great things. And he saw a fun person in me because of the dates and dancing and all the great things that we did in college, but I never did sports. And I felt like I was the laziest person because I never did sports. Yeah, I grew up dancing, but I didn't feel like when I danced that it was a sport because it was just like fun. But yes, dance is a sport. I just wasn't very good at it. And I wasn't good at hand-eye coordination and I wasn't good at a lot of things. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm not as great as my husband because I'm not as good at all these things that he's good at it. But I realized as I kept watching him through our dating and engaged and married life, because we've been married for over 11 years now, that the number one thing he does, and if you know him, you know this is true. The number one thing he does is serve. He will do everything for everybody else first, and he will do things for himself last. And that is his way of showing love to other people. And that is his way of showing love to me. And I have learned how to grasp that concept and get out of my own head and get out of the, oh my gosh, my back hurts, my life is hard, whatever type of mentality, and just get up and serve. And eventually you stop thinking about the pain in your back and you stop thinking about the hardships in your life because you realize that other people are going through hardships too. And sometimes they seem harder and sometimes they don't, but we all have hard things and we all need to learn to get up and go and serve and be that light to the world. We all have our own talents, and the best way to serve is not try to serve the way that somebody else would serve using their talents that they have, but using our own talents. And that is what God wants us to do, is to serve in the way that he knows we will be the best light. Like my talents are through music, and a lot of times I can assist someone when I am having something to do with music, whether it's a play that I'm in or when I'm teaching a voice lesson or when I'm teaching the little kids at the elementary school or when I'm doing music at the church or when I'm playing the piano. It is a way to do service, and it is a way that I can serve, but it's not necessarily the way that my husband has to serve because that's not his talent. His talent is fixing things. His talent is not mine. And God doesn't want us to shine in all the ways. Pick one. And then when you have perfected that one, or when you've gotten really good at that one, then pick another and be willing to say yes more than no when he wants you to serve and he wants you to go and say hi to that person, even though it's way out of your comfort zone.
No, it's not. Saying hi to new people is one of my favorite things in the world. If anybody listening knows me in real life, they know this is true. Like, I'll walk up to anyone and say hi to them.
So if you ever meet Emily Bernath, don't be afraid because she will be friendly and she will be nice and she will say hi to you. Well, Emily, thank you so much for coming on and joining me in this episode and for being willing to be vulnerable and talking about all of the hardships or some of the hardships of life. Is there any way that somebody can get a hold of you so they can talk to you more about this? Or are there resources that they can go to find your book and read it?
Yes. So on social media, you can find me on Instagram at Emily Bernath Author. And that is the same on Facebook as well at Emily Bernath Author. I'm also on Twitter. That's just at Emily Bernath. And my website is emilybernathauthor.com. And Broken Lenses, the first one, and Broken Lenses Volume 2 can be found anywhere books are sold. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, we will talk to you next time. Bye.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. If it resonates with you, the greatest compliment you could give is to share it with a friend who might benefit from it as well. Check out A Difference for One on Instagram for additional content. And if you have any questions, comments, a topic you'd like to hear about, or if you'd be interested in a free mini coaching session, send an email to adifferenceforone@gmail.com.